listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. Joining us right now, they always do on Mondays, is Steve Moore, and we love talking about the economy with Steve. And look, we got some jobs numbers coming in at the end of the week, and then we've also got, these closing arguments. And it just sounds to me like President Trump has a closing argument that has substance, and Kamala Harris is saying she's not Trump.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. I was at the rally last night.
Oh, how was that?
Oh my God, it was quite a spectacle. I mean, it was a blast. That people were, they sold about 4 times. I mean, there were 4 times more people wanted tickets than were available, and it was just fantastic. And everybody was in a great mood. We're feeling really optimistic. And Trump was at the top of his game. So it was a fun evening. It went on for 4 hours. It was a long day, but Trump has the look of a winner right now. He really does.
So we felt this way 4 years ago. Okay, I felt it going into.
I don't think so. I feel much more confident today than I did 4 years ago. I really did. But look, I'm not here to tell you this thing's in the bag. It just seems like Trump has a lot of momentum right now, and he's capitalizing on it. And look, Kamala's had a bad couple of weeks, and Trump's had a really good couple of weeks. But look, I want to play like we're 2 points down, not like we're 2 points ahead. So that's where we are right now.
Well, and it does seem like the closing argument for Trump is an economic one, really. I mean, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Well, he said that yesterday. That was one of the first things he said, in his speech. He said, are you better off? And, for most Americans, the answer to that question is no. And people are also worried about the future. They really are. They're worried about what things might look like in the years ahead, especially. I mean, imagine if Kamala Harris were elected and she enacted her $5 trillion tax increase. That would be ruinous for the U.S. economy. It's a high-risk proposition.
And do you think her closing argument is, I'm not Trump? I mean, that's just really what she's answering to everything?
Yeah, and I mean, look, that's not a bad argument because, look, you've got 47% of Americans who would under no circumstances vote for Trump. And so it's a fear. Trump's running on optimism, and Kamala is running on fear.
And I hope if you're right about that we end up 53-47. Because if we end up 53-47, you and I will have a very happy day after Election Day.
All I want is 50.1%. Well, look, Grace, it's not the total vote count. It's the Electoral College. It's states. And Georgia, one of the reasons I love doing your show is I've been saying for the last year, Georgia could decide the fate of the country. Not too much pressure on you and your listeners, but it is critical. Look, if you're a patriot, if you love our country, you've got to get out and vote and vote early. I mean, that was one of the messages at this rally is that, everyone kept stressing it, get out, vote early. Incidentally, Elon Musk was the speaker before Trump. And he said he thought he could identify $2 trillion of wasteful spending in the budget. $2 trillion. So that's an amazing number.
I mean, isn't that what you and I have been talking about, though? That if you go back to 2019 spending, you adjust for inflation, that brings you to about 5.4 or 5.5 trillion dollars. That's $2 trillion in wasted spending.
Well put. Your math is pretty much exactly correct. I think we're close to $7 trillion on the budget. Not quite, but we're getting there. And then we have, if you subtract $2 trillion from that, you'd be back to $5 trillion. Now, I don't think we could get. I think it's more realistic that we could cut $1 trillion out of the budget, but still, that would be an amazing thing. There's so much waste. There's so much fraud.
I think that if we did some kind of Sonny Perdue, when he was governor between 2002 and 2010, it was during, the great growth and then the economic collapse. And he was able to manage Georgia's budget for a couple of years without making drastic draconian cuts because we have to balance our budget because he went through each department. And if there was something that hadn't been spent, he zeroed it out. I mean, he didn't just take it out. He zeroed it out, took it out, There were 14,000 employees that were waiting to be filled in Georgia state government. He zeroed all of those positions out, and people had to build them back in as they needed them. So he was able to manage for a couple of years just by getting rid of money that we hadn't spent yet. Okay? And then he had to do the cuts that everybody had to do to balance the budget. I bet the federal government has got even more than that, of money that's just on paper sitting there. Do you know what I mean? It hasn't been spent yet, but they don't want to use it because we've been doing continuing resolutions for a million years, and I just think the whole budgeting process is a sham, Steve.
It is, and it was Ronald Reagan who once said so correctly that the closest thing to immortality on this earth is a government program. We just never get rid of them. And, you have programs literally that were started 70, 80 years ago, for something that was, affecting the economy in the 1950s. And we're still spending money on these things.
I had an interview with the late, great John Lewis, civil rights icon. And he and I were talking. And I said, okay, Congressman Lewis, you could make a list of 20 things we could cut, and I could make a list of 20 things that would cut, and probably they'd be pretty different lists because you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican. But I bet there'd be 3 or 4 things we could agree on. Why can't we start with that? and he goes, Martha, you're really good. It's like, but nobody wants to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, even, my conservative friends who want more money for the military, we don't need more money for the military. I'm all in favor of a strong military, but we spent $800 billion. There's huge waste in the Pentagon. My God, I live not too far from the Pentagon. It is the biggest bureaucracy in the world. Well,
how you know they're waste? Because they said they can't be audited. Oh, no, we're too big to audit.
Exactly.
Okay, no.
Well, how about the money? How about the money that's gone to Ukraine? Look, I think people have different opinions about that, but the idea that we're just going to send all this money to Ukraine, we have no idea where it went, who got it, how much of it was intercepted by. How much of that money do you actually think got to Ukraine freedom fighters? We don't know. We don't know.
Well, and it's this shell game. It's this shell game where they say, "Oh, well, we're giving them our old weapons so that it opens up money for us to buy new weapons. So it's really good for us." I said, "Okay, I may have been born at night, but I wasn't born last night, and so I don't think that this works." Steve, what I'm hoping for, is a Trump win, and then people like you and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, people that don't have an agenda other than the best fiscal responsibility for this country, get in there and start taking names and getting rid of spending. Because we're going to have a window of opportunity, and then the Democrats are going to get their feet back under them again, and we're going to have to fight for every piece of ground.
It should be the fight against waste should be bipartisan, and I hope that I like what you talked about with John Lewis. I hope that Elon Musk finds some thoughtful Democrats who would be. Back in the 1980s and 90s, there were a lot of. Bill Clinton balanced the budget, for goodness sake. He was a Democrat
for 4 years.
So why is it? Yes, exactly. So this idea now, the Democrats, all they want is just more money, and they don't even pretend like there's no waste in the budget, but we know there's massive waste. So that's just one area where I think Trump. I was thinking last night. He's an incredible showman and a marketeer like no one we've ever seen. But he also is a businessman, and he knows you don't waste money, and he knows where the bodies are buried. So that's going to be a top priority.
Well, and the good news is Joe Rogan asked him about the size of the debt, and they had a good exchange about that. Now, granted, it's hard to listen to a 3-hour podcast, but it was very good. And finally, I was cheering when he asked that question.
Yeah. Well, and that answer he gave sounded like Steve Moore. He said, we're going to have more economic growth, and we're going to get more revenues in by having a more efficient economy. And he said, we're going to find the waste, but we're not going to raise taxes. And he did say, and one other thing, and then I run, he basically said, hey, you know what? We can, he said, we can, we could actually use tariff revenue, and I never kind of thought of this before. So we can use the tariff revenue to reduce and maybe eliminate the income tax. I thought, boy, that's a clever idea.
Well, hopefully they'll all sound like Steve Moore when we get back into power. We appreciate you very much. Thanks for being with us. Go to Unleash Prosperity, and you can get the Capitalist newsletter every single morning.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We are really happy to have back with us Senator David Perdue. It is a few days until the election, and we appreciate you being back with us. Welcome, David.
Martha, it's always good to hear from you. It's great to be on your show again. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. I got to tell you, I don't know if your ears were tingling, mine were too, that last week when President Trump was on Joe Rogan, they actually talked about the debt and the deficit. And that's been one of those topics that has not been talked about as much in this election. But finally, we're starting to see people talk about it. And I thought about you when it came up, because that is something you worked really hard on at your time in the United States Senate.
And still am, Martha. There are two existential threats to America. That's why Trump's running again. One is China. We've had two presidential debates, one vice president debate, not one question on either China or the debt. The debt is the second existential threat. I mean, it's outrageous. It's out of control. I'm still working on that. I'm writing articles and studying it and all that. But I've also had some influence with President Trump. I mean, President Trump went into office in 2017 and created an economic turnaround that actually lowered the debt curve by $2 trillion. People don't talk about that because COVID hit in 2020, obviously. But this is one of the paramount things that he wants to deal with, and there are ways to do it. You've got to deal with Social Security and Medicare, and you got to save them. And then you got to get control of what has turned into an absolute boondoggle in Washington in the overhead that I call federal government.
Absolutely. And, of course, last night, Donald Trump just showed the reason why he is such a fantastic candidate, and it's because he's got a sense of timing and a sense of humor. And the statement was made a couple of days ago that Trump supporters were garbage. It was kind of like you had bitter clingers with Barack Obama, then you had deplorables with Hillary Clinton, now you had garbage supporters from Joe Biden, and President Trump came in a garbage truck and just really stole the day, didn't he?
Well, he did, but he's also up there in Wisconsin trying to tell people what his second term will be about. He loves America. This is why he ran back in 2016, and this is why I supported him. There were only two U.S. senators that supported him early in that year, and it was Jeff Sessions and me. And so I got behind him because he was an outsider, like I was, and he saw what was wrong in Washington. But he also had the ability that very few people do, and that is to connect with the American people. He's doing it again. The energy out there is as strong as I've ever seen it, as strong as it was or maybe greater than in 2016. And he is dead set on winning this thing.
So with your expertise on China and the budget and that sort of thing, how have you been able to help kind of shape this message? Because there's I don't believe it's 5 to 8% undecided, but that's what the polls say. But how do we shape that message in these final days so that people will get out and to vote early between now and Friday and then on Election Day?
Well, the only influence I've had over President Trump is being loyal to the agenda and the policies that we enacted when he was president. I was there all 4 years. And, it really did change the face of America and made the world safer. But what we're trying to do right now, no, I don't believe there are that many undecided. But the main thing we're trying to do right now is convince people to vote. If you're undecided, here's my message to them. Kamala broke it. Trump will fix it. It's very simple. He'll do it again. We did it in 17, 18, 19, and 20. He'll do it again. And here's what he did. You have to look at the record, Martha. We always talked about that when I was running back in 2016. And you were very good about pointing out all the different facets of people's backgrounds. And this is what's so critical right now. Look at her background the last 4 years, the border, the economy, inflation, energy, foreign policy. It's an unmitigated disaster. Look at the 4 years under Donald Trump. And, yes, we had COVID there, but he stood up to China, stared down Kim Jong-un. He sanctioned Putin. He told NATO to pay up or we were going to get out. He got us out of the outrageous Paris Climate Accord, ended the nuclear deal with Iran, and most of all, moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is a man that's good to his word. We know what he's going to do. And the Democrat threat, that he's a threat, or their lament, rather, that he's a threat to democracy is absolutely absurd. They're the ones that put a filibuster rule on the floor of the Senate twice in 23, and that would have destroyed our democratic republic.
Yeah, I tell you what, I find it so interesting how this whole thing has played out, that we get called the threat to democracy when the last three elections, Democrats have manipulated their process to put different people in as nominees. In 2016, Bernie Sanders should have been the nominee, but they manipulated the superdelegates so that Hillary Clinton would be in there. In 2020, Bernie Sanders again was the guy that you might not like Bernie Sanders, but he's intellectually honest. He's I don't agree with him on anything, but you know what you got with Bernie Sanders. And they manipulated it again. And then 14 million people voted for Joe Biden, and they just tossed him aside.
You know, Martha, you're the only person in the media that I've heard who gets this. Certainly they manipulated it to get Hillary Clinton. Now, who did that? I can't tell you that, but you got to believe the Barack power base was in there somewhere. Bernie was absolutely cheated out of that. He had more delegates than anybody else. And in 2020, you had the same thing with Joe Biden. He was clearly in third place. It was Bernie, then Elizabeth, then Joe. Go back and look at the numbers. And then Amy Klobuchar was convinced to get out of the race. Her delegates went to Joe, and he went to first place, and he became the delegate. And, oh, by the way, then they named this person who got less than 1% in the Democrat primary to be their VP candidate. Now, I don't know whether they knew Joe was sick or not. President Biden had all the symptoms, but I don't know if they knew that or not. But it clearly looks to me like that they've manipulated the Democratic system to get Kamala Harris to be their candidate. And I think the people kind of smell that. But more importantly, people vote their pocketbooks. They vote what they know intuitively is going on, and they know something's wrong with the border, with the economy. Look at the wars that are out there in Ukraine and the Middle East. Instinctively, voters in America know what's going on, and we have survived 240 years because of that.
You know, I had some work done at my house yesterday, and so I was at my house all afternoon, and the guy that came to do the work was a black man who has come to my house many times to do this particular work, and he got to talking to me. After he was done, he wanted to talk to me about politics, and I try not to, push my politics on people that I'm doing business with, but he wanted to talk to me about politics, and, he said, you know what, Ms. Zoller, he says, my family was better off 4 years ago. I am going to be voting my pocketbook. I'm voting for Donald Trump. And I think there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of working class people. They want to say it's white men, David, but it's white, black, and brown men that are working class that have been treated like garbage, literally, by Democrats. And now they're saying, I'm going to support my family. It's not a racial thing. It's more of a work thing.
I 100% agree. Again, nobody's talking about it that way because the media typically wants to divide us on color, gender, and all of the above. But this is about working America. What Donald Trump rolled out in Savannah, Martha, and we've talked about this for years, he rolled out a manufacturing renaissance. What were tariffs all about? It was about having a fair shake around the world. We've been putting ourselves down versus the other countries in the world, and we've been the leader of the world order since the Bretton Woods Agreement back in 1944. But, it's time for our allies to step up. That's what he said to NATO. And that's why the world was safer with him in charge. But what's happening right now in America is rebuilding America's supply chain. What we learned in COVID, Martha, was that we were way overbalanced toward China and other people. Look, I've written an article with the Washington Examiner about this. Our rare earth elements, we used to provide 80% to the world. These go into our most highly classified technology and military. And now what we do mine, we mine it here, ship it to China, they process it and ship it back. Now, think about that. Look at what China has been doing inside our infrastructure. They have made access inroads into our infrastructure. And even our FBI calls that. Secretary or Director Wray calls out how many cases they are opening against them every year. So what Trump is all about right now is this manufacturing renaissance. This is why he's gotten this uptick in the polls and this momentum, is he is striking the nerve that he hit in 2016, and that is working people in America. And I hear the same thing, black, white, men, and women, by the way. There are a lot of women who get up and work 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, punch the clock, have overtime, and are not getting respected by the Democrat Party.
Amen to that. David Perdue, what's your final message to people between now and Election Day?
2 things. Vice President Harris broke it. Donald Trump will fix it again. And the second thing is, if you don't vote, it is a vote for the other side. Please, it's your responsibility. If you don't vote, that is a vote for the other side. Please get out and vote. You got another day, 2 days, today and tomorrow, to vote early, and then Tuesday is still there. Please develop a plan and go vote.
David Perdue, thank you so much for being with us today.
Martha, God bless you. Love you.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Genevieve Collins is joining me right now. She's the Texas Director of Americans for Prosperity, one of my favorite organizations. I have been involved with them for about 25 years in different capacities and have walked neighborhoods, have gotten involved in swing states, have done things with radio rows and things where they've had meetings. They're just one of those great organizations that understands what their mission is. And so Genevieve Collins is joining us right now. How are you, Genevieve?
Good morning. I am doing excellent. How are you? I'm happy to be with you.
Well, and you launched this program called Freedom is Bigger in Texas. Tell us about that, and then tell us about why it's so important to get the vote out in Texas, even though it's a reliably red state.
Sure. Well, so Freedom is Bigger in Texas is our multi-year campaign that we just launched because we really want to make sure that Texans who, as every American knows, Texans love Texas. But we still have some work to do to ensure that there's more freedom, more opportunity, and more prosperity. For example, how do we unleash Texas energy so that we can unleash American energy dominance and keep our allies' energy secure? How do we create education freedom through education savings accounts and empower parents? How do we ensure that healthcare is more affordable and accessible across the state? There's a lot of opportunity that still needs to happen from a policy side. Even though Texas is an incredibly prosperous state, people from all across America are coming here because there's innovation, there's capital and access to it, and there's just a kind of can-do spirit. So we're launching this campaign, Freedom is Bigger in Texas, to encourage more Texans to get involved. And part of that is making sure that we're connecting people with policy, Martha. You know, it's one thing to just talk about partisanship. We really want to talk about policy and really find common ground and connect people with policy. And how we do that is really by ensuring we get out the vote, we educate people on the issues, and we make sure that Texas stays a beacon of freedom for the rest of the country.
Yeah, I use the analogy of being a red state, but the point is it's an opportunity state because Americans for Prosperity is nonpartisan, but they are, as I see them, they are free markets, they are big business, they are meaning that they support business, they want low taxes, they want low spending, they want the country and the state to be run efficiently, and they want to support policies that do that.
Absolutely. And, you know, when Texas, we're starting our own Texas Stock Exchange to compete with the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. That's going to come online next year. And the rumor mill is that SpaceX is going to be the first company to IPO on the Texas Stock Exchange.
Oh, that would be cool. That would be cool.
Wouldn't that be cool? But as you said, this is about really free market innovation, supporting entrepreneurs, supporting businesses, reducing regulation, getting the government out of your way. That's the Texas way. And we need to make sure that not only stays here in Texas, but how can we proliferate that and sell that across America? And, you know, there's this misconception that, at least in politics right now, the week that we're in, that Texas is turning blue or Texas is purple. Let me tell you, Texas is ruby red. It is ruby red. The governor is the most popular person in the state of Texas. Public opinion has flipped on school choice to now a super majority, thanks to the governor. Democrats, independents, and Republicans all want school choice at over 66% across the state of Texas. We have more candidates in the Texas House that are for deregulation, free market innovation, and getting government out of our way and cutting red tape. Texas is turning. redder and redder. And so if anyone hears that Texas is turning purple, treat that with a high level of skepticism. And a large part of that is due to our grassroots movement, making sure we're connecting people with policy and making sure people really know that their voice matters, and we want to encourage them to join our movement.
So I know that you probably work with Tony West over here in Georgia from time to time,
Sure.
and there are organizations throughout the country of AFP. So how do they work together from a state-to-state basis?
So Tony West, he's my counterpart, state director of Georgia for Americans for Prosperity. He is a great friend of mine. So he called me a couple months ago, and said, "Hey, I was working on a bill on food trucks because we have this massive too many fees, over-regulation of food trucks, and we're seeing this in Georgia." And the president of Georgia's Food Truck Association was reached out to from some people in Texas that are they're paying 3 times the fees to just have a food truck. And we worked on a bill. Here's what we did. Do you guys want to work on that? And I said, heck yeah, we do. Food trucks are part of the lifeblood in Texas. And that's just one aspect. We work on all sorts of school choice policy, healthcare policy. We really share best practices between different states on what is working when it comes to implementing policy and galvanizing people at scale.
We're talking to Genevieve Collins, who is the Texas Director of Americans for Prosperity, and we are working on, we are implementing our school choice measure. I know some people think it didn't go far enough. Other people think it went too far. I think that probably means we had a pretty good compromise as far as how things went. I look at it, and in full disclosure, I'm on the State Board of Education, and I look at it as a nice compromise to kind of get our feet wet, to kind of understand. Because what I know, they put me on the board knowing I'm a school choice advocate, because I have been supporting choice in schools. And what I love about what Georgia does is that because we have supported school choice, we've also offered opportunities within public schools to provide choice. So, for example, in our public school system here, we have a language academy. We have a culinary school. We have all kinds of options within the public school. And I think it makes public schools more competitive. The idea that more competition makes people less competitive just doesn't make sense to me.
Martha, you are so 100% on the money. And it's so exciting that Georgia is a leader in this movement. We've been working on school choice in Texas for, 40 years. My parents were involved in school choice. Actually, my grandparents were involved in school choice in the 1950s. That's how long this has been a battle in Texas. And, this has unfortunately been a issue about rural Republicans and teaming up with Democrats and protecting their school systems, because in Texas we have over 1,200 school districts. It's not like in Florida where there's only 67, or in Georgia where there's, 500 or less. We have 1,200 school districts, and a lot of them are 1,000 students or less, and they don't have a lot of options. And the state and legislators have focused on protecting the system versus enhancing the child. And that is a real problem.
Yeah, it needs to be about children, and obviously teachers are a huge part of that, and we're working really hard on retaining teachers and making sure that they feel valued and that they have the flexibility to be able to do the things they need to do in the classroom. But it's got to be child first, and it ought to protect that relationship with parents too. And I think that's what we've kind of seen in the last number of years. Genevieve, if people want to know more about AFP Texas, how can they find out?
Go to the website, www.freedomisbigger.com. Follow us there, freedomisbigger.com. You can follow me on Twitter at gcollinstx.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.